Hello and welcome to The Hero Spouse. I'm Kenda Ruth, here to answer one of your questions about marriage and midlife crisis. Today we have a female left behind and forward-moving spouse with a bomb drop of February 28th, 2023, and a date of marriage of 2010. Her husband is an at-home MLCer, which means he hasn't left yet, and he's a low-energy wallower. She says, how do I cope with his projection of blame onto me? He says I'm controlling, abusive, and manipulative. But therapists have said that's projection. I want to reconcile, but he has filed, yet he still lives in the home, and he hasn't done anything further legally. So first thing, what you're experiencing regarding everything is normal, but first regarding the filing and not doing anything. Normal. It's not abnormal that they file and stay home, but most of them do leave and have already left by then. Low energy wallowers are more likely to be at home than others, though. Second, now, how do you cope with a projection? And it's not just coping with the projection, but when he's living at home. So first thing, recognize the roots. Where is this coming from? You know that it's projection. And I think you know because you've been told by someone you consider credible or more than one person therapists. So it's good you've had that validation. Accept the validation. You know what you know. You know that maybe you aren't controlling. Now, sometimes there's some of us that we're controlling and we need to look into ourselves. But you know you're not controlling. You know you haven't been abusive. You can say, but I wouldn't, but you can say, well, you say I'm abusive. Can you give me some examples? But instead, I would just simply validate, you know what? I'm really sorry that you feel that way. But I would go a step further. In fact, if you could rephrase the validation, because I don't think he really does. I think some of his emotions are feeling that way in the moment, however. I would say, so I'm sorry you feel that way, but you know that's not true. You could go with you and I, but I don't think this is a you and I situation. There are some where I say you and I both know that's not true. That would be more like if he were complaining about being a bad parent or something. But in this case, you know that's not true. And it is important that you don't do it. I think you know that's not true. Because then you're opening to doubt. Maybe you know it's not true. You state it as a fact. And then you don't expect anything from it other than possibly prepare for monster. Expect everything, anything, and nothing. In other words, prepare that monster might come, but sometimes it doesn't. Or that they look at you going, oh, you're right. And it goes out the other ear pretty quickly after that. But they recognized you're right in the moment. And then the next hour or day, or I thought about it more and you really were wrong. You got through to it. It planted that seed anyway. Okay. You cope with knowing what you know and being confident in what you know. And then when he does that, first thing, you can set a boundary and say, you know what, you're bullying me, or you're not being fair. I wouldn't say lying, unless you said, you know what, you're lying to yourself. You're being dishonest with yourself. I wouldn't accuse you of lying to you, as in trying to, or get something out of lying, like doing it in court and saying she's controlling. It's a lie. I wouldn't go that. You can do that in court papers. But because I think this is an emotional thing where sometimes in the moments, if you believe something to be true, that doesn't make it a lie. At least the way I view lies. Lies is an intentional untruth, where you know what you're saying is not accurate. You say to him, you know that's not true. I'm so sorry you are feeling that way right now, maybe. But you know that's not true. And you say it with a soft voice, that you're sad that he's feeling that way. There's an empathy for him under it. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to change anything in the sense of he's still in a midlife crisis. You can say all these things in the beginning, but midlife crisis is still 3 to upwards of 7 years. So you'll think sometimes that it did no good, or it just escalated because he monstered at me. Well, he was going to monster anyway. You said something he didn't like. You cope by first getting away. If he is projecting blame at you verbally right now. Say, you know what? I'm so sorry you feel that way. You're not being fair, and you know what you're saying isn't true, but I'm not going to stand here and listen to you project at me. You can name the behavior you're projecting. And I'm going to walk away, and then you leave. You can go out for a walk. Another thing that you can do, this is going to depend on what it is he's saying is your fault. I got accused of being insane. It was fun. Now, it made a little bit of sense in the sense that he knows me, he knows my family. My mom is quirky, not insane, quirky. But my uncle was insane. My uncle, my mom's brother, who Chuck never met because he died before we met, but he was legally insane from the time I was 5 or 6 until he died when I was just before my 19th birthday. And Uncle Tom was my hero. But he was legally insane. There's no way around it. And so Chuck knows this, that it's in my family. So he could target me with that. So it's not as out of the blue as it might be. And he was on the phone, and we were talking, and he accused me of being insane. And this was in the first few months. So it was early in midlife crisis, right around maybe the same point you are now, was where I had this conversation in timeline-wise. And I said, Chuck, are you afraid? I used afraid or concerned. Afraid that you're going insane? Silence on the other end. Absolute silence. And then stammering. Now, I said that this happened within a few months. There was a period the next year where he was going through this also, so I could be mixing up scenarios where it was 1 year later when he was also doing the same thing, because I know by then I'd really figured out how to speak. But it was at some point, either the first year or the summer after that. And it just stopped him. So you turn it back on them and ask them. Since when you're projecting, you're accusing somebody of doing what it is you're doing. You're being controlling. Well, they might not see being controlling. They don't want to be. It's not an insult to be seen as controlling. It's a critique. It's criticism, but it's not an insult. To call somebody crazy or insane in that context is meant as an insult. There's nothing I can do about it behaviorally. It's not a behavior to change. If I'm insane, I need to go to a doctor. So right now, if he's saying controlling, that's not the same as, are you afraid you're being controlling? Because it's not an insult. But you can say, you know what? You're projecting. You and I both know. Now, abusive, that's an insult. It's a criticism, but it's an insult. You and I both, let's use the abusive one. You and I both, I'm sorry you feel the need. Now I'm changing the validation a little. I'm sorry you feel the need to accuse me of that. But, or maybe even because, and this one with the abusive, I'm going to say you and I both know that right now, the one who is bullying and being abusive is you. I didn't just say is not me. I wanted to be very overt. You could say is not me, it's you, but I'm trying, if he cut you off, I want it to get is you. And that makes me really sad. And I'm not going to put up with it. And you shouldn't put up with it either. Your behavior is atrocious, and you know it. Then, don't make it a discussion where you go back and forth. He's going to want to do that. He's going to want to escalate it to monster, and he'll already be escalated to monster. You walk away. You don't engage in the argument, even if it's hard. It's hard because it's not just wanting to engage in the argument and be a right fighter, but sometimes you want to discuss. Sometimes they get the light bulb and they're like, oh my God, you're right. And you're like, oh, we can keep going. Sometimes we do. But be really wary of that. I don't want to say it's a trap, because when I say if I say it's a trap, it gives the implication that they know what they're doing and they're setting it as a trap. So It's just that they might use it as a trap later. But you said this during our discussion. But sometimes during the discussion, they weren't thinking of it. They were being as honest as they could if they had that light bulb go off. It's not always a manipulation. They'll just use, what is it? Everything you say can and will be used against you. And that's true. It's just that when you're saying it and when they're discussing with you, they might be upfront and taking in what you say with an honest ear. Not always. But later on, when the monster is in control, they go back to their recordings in their head, and she said this. And then monster uses it against you. You cope by knowing what you know. You know that you're not abusive. You know that you're not controlling. You know that you're not being manipulative. And then you project the projection back at him. You hold up a mirror to it. The hard thing is, yes, he will deny and he will monster, and you accept that. Sorry you feel that way. Yes, you want to reconcile. You're not going to right now. He's in the home, but you're not going to reconcile right now. And he's an at-home, low-energy wallower right now, supposedly, but it's very new after bomb drop. You're not quite 6 months in. And so he could be going, he could be leaving anytime, especially since he's filed. Or you could get to the point where you can't handle it with him there, and my recommendation is you should not be the one to leave. You may have to eventually, and I don't recommend it as long as you can handle it, and I don't like it so early, but you may get to a point where you have to kick him out. Before that, I would do it by saying you have to leave. If you have to escalate it to you have packed his bags and physically locked him out. Those are two different levels of kicking him out. One of them is he goes. He physically picks up his body and picks up his stuff and leaves. The other one is he's not allowed back in because you had to pick up his stuff and pack it. I don't want you to get there yet, but I want you to know that that could happen if he doesn't leave on his own. It really is better if he leaves on his own. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know if you have any more questions, and I'll see everybody in the next question.